Inclusion is including children with special needs in the general education classroom.
Inclusion, I think, is when they integrate special needs kids into a gen ed classroom.
Inclusion is taking a student that would typically be in a classroom environment outside of the general ed classroom based on a specific special need and putting them into a mainstream or general ed classroom.
Inclusion is basically the idea that we want students who are eligible for special education to be placed in a general education setting most, if not all, of the time. So basically it's including and incorporating kids who might otherwise be segregated because of their special ed diagnosis or their needs in with their typically developing peers.
Yes, I have heard about inclusion classrooms. The student placement that I was in last semester was an inclusion math class, so that was one that I have experienced.
A couple of summers ago, I got to intern with an occupational therapist in New Zealand, and I got to help in a special needs classroom. And a couple days a week, I got to take one of our students into the normal classroom for a couple hours for an inclusion experience. So that was really cool.
I feel like I have heard of inclusion classrooms, but I've never seen one at all, ever.
My youngest son does have a special needs child in his classroom, so he is in an inclusive classroom. The little boy is very high functioning on the spectrum, but it actually has worked out really well because he learns from the other kids and the other kids learn from him. So we do have the option to do that in the future with Liam, and that's obviously a goal. We would love for him to be in an inclusive classroom. It's just that unfortunately, due to the severity of Liam's autism, Liam is in a special school, non-inclusive. He is in a classroom with 5 other autistic boys. But we have heard of them. We do have them here where we live, and I think they're wonderful, and it's a goal that I have, that I do hope that Liam can someday be in an inclusive classroom.
The main difference between a general ed classroom and an inclusive classroom is that the inclusive classroom includes the general ed students as well as the students with special needs, whereas in a general education classroom, it's usually only typically developing students.
The biggest difference is just the way that the teachers have to approach them. Just because you have students who may have a learning disability or they may not be able to function like other students properly in their own way. So to me, the biggest difference is just being able to teach the kids in a way that they can understand and feel cared for and included in.
One has special needs students in it and the other doesn't.
I feel like the main difference is with an inclusive classroom, you have to have different lesson plans for different kids, and you have to be able to figure out what level they're on, and in a regular classroom you can just teach them all the same.
Again, just in our case, I think the separate classrooms is the most effective due to the fact that Liam gets more attention. The curriculum is based completely for special needs kids, especially nonverbal autistic children, and there's more therapy available. I don't have to worry about him holding up the classroom because he's being disruptive or he's having a tantrum or anything like that. I would feel terrible if he did, cause issues for the other kids or was disruptive to other kids trying to learn and trying to stay on path and whatnot. So in our situation, the separate classroom turned out to be the best model.
A contained classroom so they can get the attention from the teachers that they need rather than with a bunch of group of people.
I've said this a lot, but it really depends on the student. So, there are people out there who are 100% inclusion. We need to put every kid that needs special ed in the gen ed room. They need to have services in the gen ed room. And that might work for some students, but it's not going to work for everybody. Just like pulling out and segregating isn't going to work for everybody. So there's really no one-size-fits-all solution. Inclusion works for some kids, and it's maybe not the most effective for other kids, and that is fluid. What works one year to the next year might look different for the same student. So it really depends on the student's needs and abilities.
I think it might be good in some ways for them to have like the one-on-one attention that they get in a non-inclusion classroom, but it also could be good for them to like be in a room with kids who are on a higher level with them to kind of like bring them up. So not totally sure, maybe a combination of both.
Ready? We had special needs classrooms, and they could come out, they came out kind of mingled with us, but they never were really in none of our classes. But they did do things to where they were allowed to be a part of the general population, be able to do stuff. So
They were self-contained and learned a lot of real-world stuff rather than subject matter of textbooks.
I don't really remember special education students at my high school, but I know that there was like a separate like part of the building that they could go to for extra help. So I guess they were just treated like normal students, but they had extra help when they needed it.
They were typically in self-contained classes, so I really did not see much of them.
So I've never been offered any inclusive classes, and I've never been to school with a child with special needs.
I think it depends on the kid, and it depends on the teacher, and it depends on the classroom, because they could all vary and be good in different ways.
No, because I bet they would get picked on a lot, and they would be disruptive to the classroom, and with the teachers that I had, I bet they wouldn't really appreciate it. Or like, the other kids would goof around a lot, because they would have to worry so much about them.
Do you think if Liam were more high functioning, that inclusion would be a better idea for a classroom, or do you think it's just better that he have a special needs classroom?
I think it's better. I think it's better to have a special needs classroom because they, in my opinion, they're still probably gonna get picked on, and I hate seeing kids get bullied. So.
For everyone, I don't know if we could make that broad of a statement, but I think if the teacher has been through trainings or is taking coursework on how to deal with students that are coming into their classroom, then absolutely I think that it would be very effective for those students and the teacher.
In the ideal inclusion classroom, both the general education students and the students with special needs would benefit because the general education students will be able to share their knowledge with the special ed students and therefore learn it better by teaching it to others and working with them, and the special ed students would be able to learn and would be motivated more by seeing their peers accomplishing at a higher level.
Okay, so gosh, the first thing I thought of with this question is, okay, who benefits? Well, clearly we want the student receiving special education to be benefiting. So they get, people talk a lot about exposure. Oh, they're getting exposed to the gen ed curriculum and the gen ed texts and their peers. And that's good, but sometimes exposure is not enough for them to make progress. So, on the one hand, exposure is good, but it's not always enough for that student to really be achieving where we want them to be. For the students, the other typically developing students in the class though, I think exposure is a good thing because they get to interact, especially with students who have more severe disabilities or even disabilities that might be more obvious that you can see. Exposure in that sense I think is good for typically developing kiddos to experience and be with that student and understand, we're more alike than different.
In my opinion, I don't think inclusion really benefits the children, any of the children at all. I think it's a catch-all attempt to try to make it easier on a school district. But every child is different, every child's needs are different, and trying to put everyone in the same environment, same classroom with the same resources just isn't a practical way to educate children today. Children like Liam need a special hands-on approach to education, and putting them in a classroom with more typical learning leveled children is going to bog that classroom to a screeching halt at times when he throws a tantrum, doing him a disservice and doing a disservice to the other children in the classroom that are trying to be all inclusive. So that's my opinion.
As we reflect on this experience of interviewing our friends, families, and special education professor, we realize that our own opinions and knowledge of inclusion in special education has truly expanded.
We've realized that it all depends on the student and the level of their need and what sort of help and resources they're going to need in their classroom or in the pull-out classroom.